You like Vikings, don't you? You've watched the shows, you've seen the helmets, the cool ones with the horns, even though those weren't actually real. You've maybe even looked up what it would be like to live back then. Mead halls, raids, adventure, the open sea. Sounds incredible, right? You would be dead within a week. I don't mean that as an insult. I mean it as a statistical near certainty. The Viking Age, roughly 793 to 1066 AD, was one of the most brutally unforgiving environments a modern human being could possibly be dropped into. And today, we're going to walk through exactly how, why, and how fast you would not survive it. This isn't about how tough Vikings were, though they were. This is about how soft, unprepared, and biologically compromised you specifically would be. Buckle up, or rather, don't. There were no seatbelts. That's kind of the point. Let's say by some miracle of time travel, you land in Scandinavia. We'll be generous. It's early September, not the dead of winter. You're near a Norse settlement in what is now Norway, around 900 AD. You open your eyes. The first thing you notice is the cold. Not, I forgot my jacket cold. Not, the AC is cranked up too high cold. We're talking about sleeping on a straw pallet on a dirt floor inside a longhouse, where the wind cuts through the gaps in the timber walls and the fire has burned low overnight. It's maybe 40 degrees Fahrenheit inside. Outside, it's worse. You don't have a sleeping bag. You don't have thermal underwear. You have a wool blanket, if you're lucky, and wool that hasn't been properly washed or treated the way modern wool blend clothing is. You are already uncomfortable, and the day hasn't started yet. Breakfast, or the lack thereof. Here's your breakfast. Rye porridge, maybe some dried fish. If you're in a prosperous household, a bit of cheese. No coffee, no juice, no toast. Definitely no eggs Benedict. The porridge is fine, honestly. Rye is nutritious. But here's the thing. You are going to be doing hard physical labor for the next 10 to 12 hours, chopping wood, hauling water from a stream, tending animals, building or repairing structures. You, who likely drive to a desk job, whose most intense physical activity might be a 30-minute gym session 3 times a week, you are going to be asked to perform sustained, heavy manual labor all day, every day. Within 2 days, your muscles will be in open revolt. By day 4, you'll have blisters on your blisters. By day 7, assuming you haven't broken something or gotten an infection, you'll be so physically depleted that you'll be sleeping through your watch duties, which, by the way, is a punishable offense. Let's talk about something nobody in the Viking shows wants to talk about: your immune system. You have grown up in a world of antibiotics, vaccines, water treatment, and antiseptic soap. Your immune system has never faced the microbial landscape of the 10th century. The bacteria in the soil, the parasites in the water, the pathogens in the animals around you. These are things your body has zero lived experience defending against. Vikings weren't particularly dirty by the standards of the time. Archaeological evidence shows they combed their hair, used ear cleaners, and bathed more regularly than many of their contemporaries. But more regularly doesn't mean what you think. We're talking about a communal bath maybe once a week. Shared water, no soap as you know it. The water you'll drink comes from streams and wells, unfiltered, untreated, containing everything that lives upstream from you, including animal waste and decaying organic matter. Your stomach, accustomed to treated municipal water, is going to react very, very badly. On day 1, you will almost certainly develop severe diarrhea. And in a world with no Imodium, no Gatorade, and no IV drip, dehydration from gastrointestinal illness was a genuine killer. We need to reset your mental image of a Viking. Forget the show. Forget the perfectly groomed men with modern physiques. Archaeological skeletal analysis tells us that Norse men of the Viking Age were, on average, around 5 foot 7 inches to 5 foot 9 inches, not dramatically different from today's averages in some countries. But the similarity ends there. Their bones show markers of extreme muscular stress from childhood. These were people who had been doing heavy physical work since they were old enough to carry a bucket. Their grip strength, their shoulder development, their core endurance. These were built over decades of necessary labor, not years of optional fitness. You, statistically speaking, are not that. You are also, and I say this with love, probably not used to wearing 20 to 40 pounds of gear for extended periods. A Norse warrior heading into conflict might wear a brynja, a chainmail shirt, which weighed between 15 and 25 pounds, plus a helmet, shield, weapon, and provisions. Walk around with a 30-pound vest for 8 hours and report back. Here is the Norse concept of rest. There wasn't one, not as you understand it. Winter was slightly slower in terms of farming, but that was when you were inside, doing textile work, tool repair, boat maintenance, and preservation of food. There was no weekend. There was no PTO. There was no scrolling your phone before bed because you were too tired to actually rest. The daily rhythm was dictated entirely by the sun and the seasons. Up before dawn, work until dark, sleep, repeat. And here's the crushing part. Even your leisure activities were physical. Norse sports included wrestling, stone lifting, running, swimming in freezing fjords, and skiing. These were not casual. These were competitive. And in a community where social status was partly measured by physical capability, being bad at them had real consequences. You stub your toe right now, you swear, you ice it, you maybe post about it. In the Viking Age, pain was ambient, constant, unmedicated. Dental pain, one of the most debilitating kinds of pain a human can experience, was simply a fact of life. Teeth were ground down by the grit in stone-milled grain. Cavities happened, abscesses happened, and there was no dentist. There was maybe a healer with herbs. Willow bark, a precursor to aspirin, was used, which helped somewhat. But a serious tooth infection could and did kill people, as it spread to the jaw, the throat, the brain. Joint pain from repetitive labor, back injuries from heavy lifting, untreated broken bones that healed crooked, eyesight that deteriorated with no correction because glasses wouldn't exist for centuries. You are going to be in pain. Constant, low-level, occasionally severe pain, and you are going to have to work anyway. Scandinavia in 900 AD was entering what historians call the medieval warm period, which actually made conditions somewhat more favorable for agriculture than earlier or later centuries. And yet, it was still Scandinavia. If you arrive in winter, which covers roughly November through March, you were dealing with temperatures that regularly drop below 0 degrees Fahrenheit in many regions. You're dealing with limited daylight. In northern Norway, the sun barely crests the horizon for just a few hours. The longhouse helps. A communal longhouse with a central hearth and animals kept inside at one end, yes, livestock inside, actually stayed reasonably warm due to the combined body heat. The animals weren't a luxury, they were a heating system. But here's the thing about central hearths with no chimneys. The smoke has to go somewhere. It drifts upward and out through a hole in the roof. This means the interior of a Viking longhouse was perpetually filled with low-level smoke. Archaeological and medical analysis of Viking Age skeletons shows widespread signs of respiratory issues, scarred lung tissue, indicators of chronic inflammation. The people who lived there had adapted to some degree. You have not. You are going to spend the winter slowly being smoked like a piece of salmon. The sea is actively trying to kill you. If you somehow make it onto a longship, perhaps you've impressed someone, perhaps you've been pressed into service, perhaps you're just very unlucky. You are now facing the North Atlantic. The longship is a marvel of engineering. Flexible, shallow drafted, symmetrical so it can reverse direction without turning around. It is genuinely one of the greatest maritime achievements in human history. It is also completely open. No cabin, no shelter from the elements. You sleep on deck, or you sleep at your oar bench. You eat hardtack and dried meat. You drink from barrels that, by week 2, are starting to grow things you don't want to think about. The North Atlantic in autumn, peak raiding season on the way home, produces swells of 20 to 30 feet with terrifying regularity. Seasickness, which modern sailors combat with patches and pills, is simply your constant companion. You will vomit until there is nothing left, and then continue to dry heave while trying to row. Falls overboard were obviously fatal. The water temperature in the North Atlantic, even in summer, rarely exceeds 55 degrees Fahrenheit. Hypothermia incapacitation begins within 30 minutes. You are not wearing a life jacket. No one is coming to save you. Let's not forget that the landscape itself is populated by things that can hurt you. Wolves were a genuine presence in Scandinavian wilderness. Brown bears, wild boar, severely underestimated as a danger, could disembowel a person in seconds. Even domesticated animals were dangerous by modern comparison. Cattle and horses of the era were less domesticated, less selectively bred for docility, and handled primarily by people with decades of experience. You, with no experience handling livestock, and the body language awareness of someone who grew up entirely in a world of domesticated pets, are going to approach these animals wrong, and you are going to get kicked, gored, or bitten. In a world with no tetanus shot, a deep puncture wound from an animal bite is not a minor inconvenience. It is potentially a death sentence, measured in days. You don't speak the language. Old Norse is not English. It is not close to English in any way that would allow for survival-level communication. It is a North Germanic language that would be almost entirely incomprehensible to a modern English speaker, despite English having borrowed some Norse words over the centuries. Hello, my name is, and I come in peace, is not something you will be able to say. You will open your mouth and produce sounds that mark you, instantly, as a foreign outsider. In a society where reputation and community membership were everything, where being a stranger with no kin ties, no allegiances, no known history, you are immediately a liability. You are someone no one has vouched for, someone with no honor debt anyone would call in on your behalf. In the best case, you are put to work as a thrall, a slave. This was a real institutionalized part of Norse society. Thralls did the worst labor, ate the least, had no legal rights, and could be killed by their owners with minimal social consequence. The legal system will destroy you. Norse society have laws. The Thing system, regional assemblies where disputes were adjudicated. This was actually a sophisticated legal tradition in many ways, but it operated on principles that will be completely alien to you. There was no state to enforce rulings. If someone wronged you, you or your family pursued justice. This meant that legal decisions often resulted in outlawry, the declaration that someone was outside the protection of law, that anyone could kill them without consequence. Being declared an outlaw was, in effect, a community-sanctioned death sentence. And the triggers for social conflicts that could lead to this outcome were not things you'd recognize. Insults, specific ritualized insults called neave, were legally actionable. Questioning a man's courage, implying cowardice, or making certain sexual implications were not just rude, they required a response, either in court or in blood. Everything in Viking society ran on honor. Your word was your bond in a way that has no modern equivalent. If you made a promise, an oath, and broke it, you were done. Socially, legally, morally done. Oaths were sworn on rings, on weapons, before witnesses. Breaking an oath was not just embarrassing, it marked you as neithinger, the worst possible thing a person could be called. Worthless, cowardly, without honor. Consider how many times a day you bend the truth, exaggerate, cancel plans you committed to, or quietly fail to follow through on something you said you'd do. In modern life, this is normal. Annoying to others, perhaps, but normal. In 900 AD Norse society, it is reputation ending, potentially life ending. Let's say, despite everything, you've made it a few months. You've managed to communicate enough to be somewhat useful. You've survived the water, the smoke, the cold, and now, for whatever reason, violence has found you. Maybe it's a raid by a neighboring clan. Maybe you've been conscripted to crew a ship on a raiding expedition. Maybe someone took offense to something you did and has challenged you. Here is the uncomfortable truth. You are not prepared for this. Not just in terms of training, though that's a massive issue. You have never swung a sword for real. You've never handled a shield in actual combat. The weight of a real sword, the speed at which a trained opponent moves, the absolute chaos of a shield wall. These are things that people trained for from childhood. Viking warriors, and not every Norse person was a professional warrior, that's a misconception, but those who were trained extensively. The shield wall, the formation tactics, the instinctive responses to attacks, these were drilled until they were automatic. Your response time, trained by decades of relative physical safety, is oriented toward verbal de-escalation, backing away, calling for help. None of these instincts work in a 10th century melee. The weapons are heavier than you think. A Viking Age axe, the iconic weapon of the period, in its bearded axe form, used by infantry, weighed between 2 and 4 pounds. That sounds light until you swing it correctly, repeatedly, in actual combat conditions, while also defending yourself with a shield that weighs 10 to 15 pounds. The sword, a status weapon, expensive and rare, weighed around 2 to 3 pounds. But the geometry of sword fighting requires that your wrist, shoulder, and core absorb enormous force on every parry and blow. Without conditioned joints and muscle memory, you will injure yourself within minutes. The onion test, feeding a wounded man with an abdominal wound soup with onions, and then smelling the wound to see if his gut was perforated, is documented and was actually diagnostically reasonable. But there are no antibiotics. A wound that gets infected, which in a world of soil, animal waste, and unwashed hands is nearly inevitable, becomes septic. And sepsis, without modern intervention, kills within days. The arrow in your shoulder has a 30 to 40% chance of killing you, not from the arrow itself, but from what grows in the wound afterward. And no one around you is going to call an ambulance. They're going to pack the wound with herbs, say a prayer to Eir, the Norse goddess of medicine, and hope. Life expectancy. Let's talk numbers. Average life expectancy in Viking Age Scandinavia was somewhere between 35 and 45 years. Now, this number is heavily skewed by infant and child mortality, which was catastrophic by modern standards. If you made it to adulthood, you had a reasonable shot at reaching your 50s or 60s. But you wouldn't make it to adulthood. You'd be arriving as a modern adult, with a body that has never been seasoned by the grinding attrition of this environment. And you'd be competing, biologically, against people who have been. Women in childbirth faced terrifying odds. Maternal mortality rates estimated from skeletal evidence suggest that a significant portion of Norse women died in or near childbirth. If you are a woman reading this, I don't need to elaborate further on why that changes your survival calculus dramatically. For everyone, the cumulative effect of poor nutrition in winter, chronic pain, physical labor, microbial exposure, and violence creates a clock. Every day is a roll of the dice. No one in the 10th century is going to ask how you're doing, not in the way you need. The concept of mental health as we understand it, depression as a condition, anxiety as a diagnosable state, trauma as something requiring processing, does not exist in the cultural framework around you. There are no therapists. There are no support groups. There are no crisis hotlines. What there is, community obligation. You are expected to function, to contribute, to pull your weight. The social fabric of Norse life was deeply communal, and that communalism had warmth and belonging to it. But it also had zero tolerance for what modern people might recognize as mental health crises. If you are prone to depression, and the dark, sunless Scandinavian winter with its extreme light deprivation would affect virtually any modern person's serotonin regulation, you have no recourse, no medication, no light therapy lamp. Just more darkness, more cold, more hard work. Seasonal affective disorder in a world with no treatment is just your winter experience. The things you'd miss. Let's take a moment, because this script isn't just about how you die. It's about the texture of what you'd lose. You would miss information, the ability to know what's happening beyond 20 miles. News in the Viking Age traveled at the speed of a horse or a ship. Events that would take you seconds to learn about now, a war, a death, a change in power, might take months to reach you, if they ever did. You would miss light. Artificial light meant tallow candles or oil lamps. Dim, smoky, expensive. After sunset in winter, your world is essentially dark. Reading, if you could read at all, which statistically speaking most people couldn't, becomes a luxury. You would miss privacy. The longhouse was communal. You slept, ate, worked, argued, and existed within feet of everyone around you all the time. There was no door to close, no room of your own, no moment of genuine solitude unless you walked into the wilderness, which had its own set of problems. You would miss certainty, not knowing if the harvest will be enough, not knowing if the ship will come back, not knowing if the fever your child developed this morning is mild or mortal. And yet, what they had that we don't. This is the part of the video where I have to be honest with you in the other direction. There was something in Viking Age Norse culture that we've largely lost, and it's worth naming. Community, in a form so total and unconditional that we barely have a word for it anymore. Your kin group was everything. They would avenge you. They would care for you when you were sick. They would mourn you with rituals that took days and involved the entire village. There was purpose in the work. Every task you did was visibly, immediately necessary for the survival of people you loved. The bread you baked fed your children that night. The boat you repaired would carry your brother home. Your labor had direct, legible meaning. There was a relationship with the natural world, its rhythms, its patterns, its ferocity, that has been almost entirely severed for most modern people. The Norse understood the sea not just as a route, but as a presence. The forest not just as scenery, but as a negotiation. And there was a cultural tradition of story, the sagas, the oral poetry, the Eddas, that were not entertainment in the way we use that word now. They were the operating system of a civilization, encoding values and histories and cosmologies that gave life its frame. You would lose almost all of what makes your current life livable, but you would inherit something extraordinary. And then you'd probably die of dysentery anyway. So, where does that leave us? You would not survive the Viking Age. Not because you're weak or stupid or unworthy, but because you are the product of your time, as they were of theirs. The Norse people who lived through that era were not superhuman. They were deeply human, in ways that should humble and move us. They got sick, and they pushed through. They lost children, and they kept building. They faced the ocean's worst and sailed anyway. They built legal systems and poetry traditions and trade networks and ships of breathtaking elegance, not from abundance, but from necessity and ingenuity. The question this video is really asking isn't, are you tough enough for the Viking Age? Of course you aren't. None of us are. The question is, what does their world tell us about our own? We have eliminated so many of the things that killed them. Disease, cold, hunger. We have built walls against these forces that they could barely imagine. And that's extraordinary. That's one of the great achievements of human civilization. But we've also lost the friction that makes certain things meaningful. The earned warmth of a fire you built yourself. The specific joy of food you grew. The irreplaceable weight of a community that genuinely needs you. You wouldn't survive their world. But maybe, just maybe, there are pieces of it worth mourning a little. And on that note, if you enjoyed this descent into historical mortality, subscribe, because we do this kind of thing regularly. Hit the bell, leave a comment about which part of the Viking Age you think would get you first. My money is on day 2, contaminated water. I'll see you in the next one.